Before you decide that this is the lowest point you have ever reached, there is something you need to hear. Something most people go their entire lives without ever realizing. Your life has been quietly recording a number that no one else can see. A number that counts every time you kept moving, when everything inside you wanted to stop, every silent battle you fought without recognition. Every moment where life demanded more strength than you believed you had, and yet you still found a way to stand. And what makes this so significant is not just the struggle itself, but the fact that while you were surviving those moments, something deeper was being built within you without your awareness, because there are seasons where it feels like life is pushing against you. But in truth, it is applying pressure to reveal a version of you that could not exist without that intensity. And if this message is reaching you right now, it is not random. It is a reflection that you are standing much closer to a turning point than your current circumstances suggest. And here is where many people misunderstand the process. They expect growth to feel uplifting, motivating, even beautiful. They assume that if they are aligned with the right path, then clarity should come easily and confidence should feel natural. But the reality is far more complex. Some of the most transformative phases of your life feel nothing like progress while you are inside them. They feel like confusion, like disconnection, like slowly realizing that the people you once believed would walk beside you forever are no longer aligned with who you are becoming. And there comes a moment where distraction stops working, where you can no longer escape your own thoughts. And that is the exact point where real change begins, because becoming whole is not something that happens when everything feels comfortable. It happens when you are forced to confront the parts of yourself you avoided for years, not as punishment, but as revelation, showing you what still holds influence over your emotions and your decisions. And what makes today carry weight is not because something extraordinary suddenly appeared in the sky, and it is not about hidden meanings reserved for a select few. It is about what this moment symbolizes. Because when you look at today, May 4th, and you reduce it through numerology, it becomes the number 9. And that number has long been connected to endings, to completion, to the closing of one chapter before the next begins. And whether you believe in numerology or not does not change the deeper truth. Life itself operates in cycles. Nothing remains in the same phase forever. Nature does not allow it. Trees do not stay empty. The earth does not remain frozen. Even the harshest winters eventually release their hold. And right now we are in early May, a time when nature stops looking backward and begins moving forward with undeniable force. The cold fades. Growth pushes through the surface, and life regains its momentum. And human beings are not separate from that rhythm. Sometimes the heaviness you have been carrying is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that you have been holding onto a phase that was already meant to end. And what if the exhaustion you feel is not because you are falling behind, but because a version of you has reached its natural conclusion, and endings are not always gentle. Sometimes they feel like pressure before they feel like relief. There are moments where nothing appears different on the outside. Your surroundings remain unchanged. Your routine stays the same, but internally, something shifts so deeply that your tolerance for what once felt normal begins to disappear, almost instantly. Conversations that once felt engaging now drain your energy. Patterns you accepted without question now feel unbearable. People you once pursued now feel distant, and that is not confusion. That is completion. Sometimes the clearest sign that your life is about to move forward is that your current life no longer fits you. And one of the most misunderstood parts of this process is what happens when everything you thought you had already dealt with begins to rise again. Emotions you believed were resolved. Pain you thought you had released. Memories you assumed had lost their impact. Desires you buried to keep others comfortable boundaries. You avoided setting in order to maintain peace, and when all of this comes back to the surface, most people immediately think something is going wrong. But what if this is not a breakdown? What if this is the final stage before everything changes, and this is where the next part becomes impossible to ignore? If you've been looking at yourself lately and feeling like you are slipping backwards, like somehow you are losing control, becoming too sensitive, too reactive, too overwhelmed by things that should not affect you anymore, I need you to pause right there, because what you are interpreting as regression is actually something far more profound. Unfolding beneath the surface, you are not falling apart. You are coming face to face with the parts of yourself that were buried for survival. What many people call instability is often the moment they first encounter their own shadow. And the shadow is not something to fear. It is not a dark force working against you. It is not a flaw in your character. It is the collection of every emotion, every instinct, every truth you once had to silence because at some point in your life expressing them came with consequences. Maybe your anger was dismissed and labeled as a problem. Maybe your truth disrupted people who preferred your silence. Maybe your needs were overlooked so consistently that eventually you convinced yourself they did not matter, and so you learned to suppress, to adjust, to shrink. But nothing that is pushed down truly disappears. It simply waits beneath the surface. And during the most intense seasons of your life, those buried fragments begin to rise again, not as a punishment, but as an invitation. Because life is not trying to break you, it is trying to restore you into wholeness. The parts of you that you rejected never stopped existing. They have been waiting for the moment when you would finally have the strength to face them without turning away. And for many people, this is the exact stage where everything begins to shift, because the moment you stop avoiding what lives inside you is often the moment your life stops repeating the same cycles in different forms. And here is where the truth becomes even more confronting. Success on its own does not transform a person the way people believe it will. It does not heal insecurity. It does not satisfy a constant need for validation. It does not create discipline or self-respect where those things have not already been built. Instead, it amplifies whatever foundation already exists within you. And you have seen this pattern before, even if you did not fully recognize it at the time. People who once seemed to have everything, attention, relationships, opportunity, recognition, wealth doors opening in every direction. And yet over time, something in them began to fade, not because life turned against them, but because what they received externally grew faster than what they had developed internally and without a strong foundation. Even the greatest blessing becomes something that cannot be sustained. And this may be the part you have been misunderstanding about your own journey. Maybe the reason things felt delayed. The reason opportunities did not arrive when you wanted them. To the reason certain doors remained closed even when you felt ready was never about you being overlooked. It was about you being prepared. Because sometimes life will not give you something, not because you are unworthy, but because your current version of yourself would not be able to hold it without losing it. Some rewards do not come later because you were forgotten. They come later because you are being shaped into someone who can actually keep them, and if your path has felt heavier than the people around you. If it feels like you have had to fight for things others seem to receive without effort, there is a deeper reason for that. Your journey was never designed to be fast. It was designed to be solid. It was designed to build a version of you that does not collapse the moment life finally begins to open up, while others were given visibility before they developed depth. You were being given depth before the world ever had a chance to see you, and that difference changes everything. Because when your moment arrives, it will not just look impressive from the outside. It will be grounded in something that cannot easily be taken away. And there is a pattern in life that becomes impossible to ignore once you truly see it. The people who go through the most powerful transformations are rarely the ones constantly seeking attention. They are not the loudest voices in the room. They are often the ones who stepped back, who chose silence, who disappeared for a period of time without explanation, the ones who stopped feeling the need to justify their process to others while everyone else was focused on being noticed. They were focused on becoming. And that kind of quiet work reshapes a person in ways that external validation never could. Because when there is no applause, no reassurance, no recognition, you are forced into a decision. You either break under the weight of being unseen, or you build something within yourself that most people never access. Because when your effort is no longer fueled by attention, it begins to be fueled by purpose. And that shift is where everything begins to change. And this is exactly where the next layer of your journey starts to reveal itself. There is a moment in your life where everything begins to shift in a way that most people around you will never fully understand, because the moment you start moving with purpose instead of chasing approval, you begin transforming into a completely different kind of person. And purpose does something that attention never can. It reshapes your identity from the inside out. It builds you in silence. It refines you when nobody is watching. And that is why the most undeniable results almost always come from the years no one saw, the quiet seasons where you felt invisible, where it seemed like nothing was happening, where it looked like you disappeared while everyone else kept moving forward. And yet those are the exact years where everything real was being built. And this is why, when certain people finally step into their moment, it appears sudden to the outside world. It looks like luck, like overnight success, like something just shifted out of nowhere. But what people never witnessed were the long stretches of discipline, the sacrifices made in private, the nights filled with doubt, the moments where quitting would have been easier, but something deeper refused to let go. And if you truly listen to those who have walked through the most difficult seasons, not the ones who speak about growth in theory, but the ones who have actually been tested and reshaped by life, you begin to notice a pattern that almost feels unbelievable, regardless of their background or their story. They often arrive at the same conclusion. They say they would not change what they went through, and from the outside, that sounds impossible to accept, because how could anyone choose to keep the pain, the isolation, the setbacks, the years of feeling behind the nights filled with uncertainty and doubt? How could anyone look back at those experiences and not wish for something easier? But the truth behind that statement is not about enjoying suffering. It is about understanding what those experiences created within them. Because once you have passed through certain phases of life, you begin to see that some lessons cannot be learned in comfort. Some levels of confidence cannot be built through constant praise. Some forms of self-respect cannot exist in an environment where everything is handed to you easily. And eventually your perspective shifts. You stop viewing those years as something that took from you, and you start recognizing them as the years that constructed the version of you that became undeniable. The pain itself was never the reward. It was the transformation it forced within you that became valuable. And that is why people who have truly risen through difficult seasons carry a kind of gratitude that is hard to explain. It is not shallow. It is not forced positivity. It is a deep awareness that if life had been easier, they might have remained smaller, less capable, less grounded. And whether you realize it yet or not, you are moving toward that same realization. There will come a day when you look back at the phase you are living through right now. The confusion, the silence, the pressure, the moments that felt directionless. And you will finally understand that it was never difficult because life was working against you. It was difficult because life was shaping you into someone you could not have become any other way. And one of the most challenging aspects of this process is what happens while you are still in the middle of rebuilding. Because during that time, people around you begin forming their own conclusions about who you are. They observe your struggles. They notice your absence. They see you become quieter, more selective, less available. And because they cannot interpret what is actually happening, they create their own narratives. Some assume you lost your drive. Others believe you gave up. Some think your best moments are already behind you. But what they fail to recognize is that transformation rarely looks impressive in its early stages. Real growth is not clean or obvious. It is often uncomfortable, slow, uncertain. It looks like someone who was once everywhere suddenly becoming difficult to find. And those who lack depth in their perception almost always misread this phase. They confuse temporary silence with permanent failure. They assume the story has already ended when in reality it has not even reached its turning point. And the people who judge you too early are rarely the ones who stay long enough to witness what comes next. And this is where the true satisfaction emerges. Not in proving anyone wrong, not in seeking revenge, not in making your success a statement to those who doubted you, but in something far more profound. It is in becoming so deeply grounded, so clear, so aligned with who you are, that the version of you they thought they understood no longer exists. Because the truth is, some people encountered you while you were still in the process of being built, and they made the mistake of believing that what they saw was final. But what they witnessed was never the finished version. It was only the beginning, and as this realization settles in, something even deeper is about to unfold. There is something almost deceptive about the years that stretch you to your absolute limit, because while you are living inside them, it feels like everything being reshaped is happening outside of you. You think the struggle is about your circumstances, about money not flowing the way it should, about relationships that shift or collapse, about opportunities that never quite land, about timing that feels off, about doors closing at the worst possible moments, about people walking away, about plans falling apart before they can fully form. And yes, all of that feels real. All of that carries weight. All of that leaves an imprint. But what most people fail to see until much later is that the most intense seasons of your life are not designed to change your external reality. First, they are designed to quietly redefine your standards. And that transformation is so subtle, so internal, that it often goes unnoticed while it is happening. Until one day, you look at your life and realize you are no longer the same person who once tolerated what you now refuse to accept, because something within you has shifted, and it did not announce itself. It did not arrive with clarity or certainty. It simply began altering your responses, your reactions, your tolerance, and your sense of worth. And suddenly, the things that once had power over you begin losing their influence. The attention that once made you feel significant no longer carries the same weight. The validation you once depended on starts feeling hollow. The approval you once chased at the cost of your own truth begins to lose its grip. And you notice yourself stepping away from conversations that once held your interest, pulling back from environments you once tried desperately to belong, in becoming less accessible to people who only appear when it serves them. And at first this creates confusion, because a part of you starts questioning whether you are becoming distant, whether you are becoming difficult, whether you are closing yourself off too much. But what is actually unfolding is far more profound than that surface-level interpretation. You are not becoming harder to connect with. You are becoming harder to control, and that distinction changes everything. Because the experiences that challenged you did not just build resilience, they sharpened your awareness. They forced you to become honest about what truly deserves a place in your life. They showed you that familiarity does not equal alignment, that just because something feels known does not mean it is meant for you. They revealed that not every opportunity deserves your energy simply because it looks appealing, that not every person deserves your loyalty simply because they have been present for a long time. And this is where your life begins to shift in ways that others may never fully understand. Because the very things that once defined your choices no longer impress you. The people you once pursued now feel draining. The environments you once longed to be part of now feel limiting. And this is not a reflection of arrogance, it is a reflection of growth. It is the natural result of evolution. And this is why so many of you have been feeling disconnected recently, not because you have lost direction, not because something is wrong with you, not because life is empty, but because your internal standards have quietly outgrown the spaces that once felt normal, and that creates a phase that can feel isolating. Because when your internal shift happens before your external reality catches up, you are left standing between two versions of your life. one that no longer fits, and one that has not fully arrived, and that space can feel uncomfortable. It can feel uncertain. It can make you question whether you are making the right choices. But that space is also where some of the most powerful transformation occurs, because when you stop accepting what drains you, you begin opening space for what truly supports you. And when people imagine reaching a breakthrough, they often picture something external, changing. They imagine opportunities appearing, relationships aligning, financial pressure, easing recognition finally arriving, doors opening in visible ways that confirm their efforts meant something. And there is nothing wrong with wanting those outcomes. There is nothing wrong with desiring relief after carrying so much for so long. But one of the most profound realizations you will ever have is that sometimes the greatest reward does not arrive as something outside of you. Sometimes the greatest reward is the person you have become. And that idea may sound simple until you fully understand its depth, because there was a version of you that relied on others to validate your decisions before trusting yourself. A version of you that ignored warning signs because the fear of being alone felt heavier than the discomfort of staying. A version of you that stayed silent when something hurt, because maintaining peace felt safer than expressing truth. A version of you that constantly over-explained, overgave, overextended, and overproved your worth, because somewhere deep inside you believed that your value had to be earned rather than recognized. And as you sit with that realization, you begin to understand that something irreversible has already begun within you, and it is leading you into the next phase, whether you feel ready or not. There comes a point, after you have carried more than you ever thought you could, where something inside you begins to shift in a way that is almost impossible to describe at first. Because it does not arrive as a loud breakthrough, it does not come with a dramatic announcement. It starts quietly, almost unnoticeable. But suddenly you begin to recognize when your energy is being taken instead of supported. You begin to feel the difference between what nourishes you and what slowly depletes you. And without forcing it, without overthinking it, you start stepping away from situations your past self would have held on to at any cost. You begin releasing things you once believed you could not live without. And what is happening in that moment is far more significant than it appears, because, without realizing it, you are building a level of clarity that many people spend their entire lives chasing, a clarity that reshapes how you choose, how you connect, how you protect your space. It sharpens your decisions. It transforms your relationships into something more balanced and intentional. It strengthens your boundaries in a way that no longer requires explanation, and it creates a kind of internal peace that becomes increasingly difficult for anything external to disrupt. And once that process begins, your experience of life starts to feel different, not because everything around you suddenly transformed overnight, but because you reached a point where you stopped sacrificing your own truth just to maintain comfort for others. And that moment, the moment you stop turning against yourself for the sake of keeping the peace, is the moment life begins to open in ways that force and control never could achieve. And this is why the seasons that challenge you the most often produce the individuals who carry the most presence, not because pain is something to celebrate, not because struggle is something to romanticize, but because pain has a way of removing everything that is not authentic. It strips away illusions. It dissolves what was never aligned until what remains is something real, something solid, something that reflects who you were always meant to become beneath the expectations and the conditioning. And this is where your perspective begins to change, because yes, it is possible that new opportunities are approaching. It is possible that doors you have been waiting on are preparing to open. It is possible that life is aligning in ways you cannot fully see yet. But before any of that becomes visible, there is something far more important already happening within you. One of the clearest signs that your most difficult years are finally leading somewhere meaningful is that for the first time in a long time, You are no longer trying to reshape yourself into someone you are not. You are no longer chasing an identity that requires you to abandon who you truly are. Instead, you are stepping into yourself fully. And that shift carries more power than any external validation ever could. And if you are still here, still listening, still allowing yourself to absorb this message, that alone says more about your current path than you might realize, because it reflects a part of you that has endured, a part of you that continues to show up even after everything you have experienced, a part of you that refuses to give up, even when there is no immediate proof that things are changing. And that is the exact point where the most meaningful chapters of a person's life begin. Not when everything is clear, not when everything makes sense, but in the moment someone chooses to keep moving forward before they have evidence that the path ahead will unfold.